Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of, I guess, 5 novels and a couple different books. I think that's more efficient. I'm trying something new, Pops. Is that still as impressive, or?
Oh, yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Okay.
So
So,
I thought you'd be talking with an Irish accent now. How much time did
sure,
you spend in Ireland?
I did. I spent some time in Ireland. It's good to be back, but I left my heart in Ireland, somewhere west of Dublin, I think.
And apparently your sister left an earring in London.
Oh, did she?
Yeah,
Oh, man. We'll just have to go back and get it, I guess.
yeah, just
Nothing,
hop a plane. Well,
nothing
anyway,
left of
I
it,
am
but
Alton Gansky. I'm Gansky the Elder, and I'm the author of about 50 books, if you count everything, I suppose. Mostly novels, but some nonfiction. And out of all those 50, there's 2, maybe 3 that are good. So.
well, I mean that's a pretty good percentage, though. They can't all be winners, right? So
Well, what's the old saying? Even a blind squirrel finds an acorn every once in a while.
occasionally, yeah. Saying the 5 novels, though, it's just not as impressive when you follow it up with your 50 books. So
Well, some of those are work for hire things too, and the like. But then again, I'm a good deal older than you, so
yeah, like 3 or 4 years, right?
several years,
Okay, 3 or 4 decades, maybe.
decades.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't. I'm not a numbers guy. I'm not a numbers guy.
Anyway,
So
welcome back. Welcome back.
thank you. Molly will be joining us in a bit, having some computer issues. So if you're looking for her, she will be on a little bit later. Up until then, it will be my job to monitor the chat room. So bear with me.
Be
We
warned.
are, yeah, be warned. We are back with a special Ask the Authors episode. Um, we haven't done this in a while. This used to be a regular feature on our podcast, and discontinued it this year for a variety of reasons, but we're back for 1 week only. And so we've been collecting your questions over the course of the last 2 weeks, even while I was away in Ireland, diligently collecting all your wonderful questions. And we're going to tackle those tonight. Should be fun. Pops, I'm going to be tossing the questions to you, and I will let you take the first answer so that I can monitor the chat room. Hopefully that'll work well. Oh, I know what I forgot. Molly's probably going to yell at me. Share, please. Share us. Thumbs up if you're watching us on YouTube. If you're listening to us on the audio-only version, you can watch us live every other Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You see, it's been so many good things going on. I've got Ireland in mind, and I knew I'd drop something. So, but yeah, do help us out. It does help us out by subscribing and hitting the thumbs up on that video. So if you could do that for us, that would be great. So, Pops, you ready for these questions?
I sure am. I
Excellent.
think.
The first one is kind of a format type questions. It says, how do you prefer to handle typesetting words in made-up languages? Do you use italics? Or if you're using interior thoughts within dialogue. So the question asker has left an example here. She says, Kata's brow furrowed. Snack? Zeta looked around warily before she whispered, snack. Ipanu. The last word would be in italics. Ipanu is apparently the word in this made-up language meaning snack. So, yeah, Pops, how would you handle that?
Yeah, when I first read this question, I was reminded of the days when I would read a lot of science fiction, and especially short story science fiction, and you would see this done. There would be some alien someplace, and they would say something in their own language, and they would put it all in italics. That seems to have fallen out of favor, and personally, I'm rather glad for it. So what I would say is this. The short answer is the first key is to be consistent. If you're going to do that, be consistent. Though I don't think it's the best choice in all of this. The second key is to know that publishers have their own style sheet. So you may set it up that way in the draft that you're going to submit to them, but they have their own style sheet, so they may change it. Now, for those who may not be familiar with the term, a style sheet is a document, sometimes is almost as long as a book, and it's what the publisher uses in-house for the way they want things. So an example would be, do you capitalize the personal pronouns of deity? God is on his throne. Do you capitalize his, H-I-S, or not? And it varies from place to place. There is no standard way of doing that. So some houses say yes, some houses say no. Okay, so there's a difference in the styles between the publishers. If you're familiar with guides like Chicago Manual of Style, usually they'll use that for book length work and then add to it, or have pages that say, we don't do it that way here, kind of thing. So just understand, in the second key here, just understand that you may set it up that way, but when it comes out, the publisher may have changed it. Now, I would also say that in the made-up language question is going to be used, if the made-up language is going to be used a lot in the book, then I would avoid using italics altogether, because it's just too difficult to read. It's hard on the reader's eyes, and it makes the page really weird. So I wouldn't do that, but I wouldn't imagine in most cases you're going to have paragraphs of a language the reader can't understand, unless you're going to do something which is a bad idea, then having somebody translate it. So you might have a little bit of that, but normally, even in science fiction and in fantasy and stuff, there'll be the occasional word they'll throw in. Now, where some of this comes from, there used to be a style, and in fact, you'll still find it in use today, that if you use a foreign word in, say, an article or something that you're writing, you would put it in italics to indicate that it's not an English word. And then the second time you used it, you wouldn't put it in italics. So you introduce it as being a foreign word, and then after that, it's just set in the typical typeface that's being used. And so those things have persisted over time. Italics today are really used for internal dialogue, that is thoughts, or sometimes true dialogue. You know, we talk to ourselves in our minds, so that's usually done in italics now. That seems to be the precedent and the current standard. Sometimes it's used for emphasis also, and a few other things. So if you have italics in your book being used for internal dialogue and emphasis and foreign language or alien language or fantasy language, whatever it is in there, then you're going to have a lot of italics, and the reader is not going to know which is which. They'll have to stop and try to figure that out. So I would really kind of advise against it. You know, technically, if you're going to use italics for a thought, which was part of the question too, internal dialogue, which is what you do, and you're mixing it with spoken dialogue, you still separate it. You treat that internal dialogue, the one in italics, as a beat. Remember what a beat is? A beat is some kind of action that breaks up the dialogue. So in our show notes, I put in an example, and the example is this, open quote, no way, period, I'm not going to do it, period, close quote, then in italics, the phrase, is this guy crazy? Then open a quote, so, comma, don't ask again, period, close quote. So the idea there then is the reader knows I'm hearing this, or the person is saying this aloud, but thinking this, and you can separate them that way.
I 100% agree. Well done. Thanks. Next question. No, I'm teasing. I want to stress a couple things very quickly, because I do agree with everything that you're saying. Consistency, I think, is very, very important. But even more so, one might argue, what's more important is clarity. And clarity, as long as you're being clear and the reader can follow it, you're probably going to be okay. So consistency and clarity, those are the things that you're looking for. In the example that was included in the question, the response after the question was snack, and then the response in quotation marks was snack, ipanu. So that tells me that she's whispering this. If this is something that she wants, if this character is thinking this, if the character is trying to equate the word snack to ipanu, maybe she's not saying it out loud. Maybe she, or I'm assuming it's a she, maybe he or she is simply thinking that, making the connection in her mind of the word to the word that she's more familiar with, the strange English word to the familiar not English word.
Yeah. Now, in this case, and you're bringing up something good here, and they can't see it, those watching the video or listening on audio, but so get the show notes. It's quote snack should be an M dash, and then epanu being the foreign word. And in that case, I would say you could probably italicize that one word because it's being stressed. Not because it's a different language, but because it's being stressed, and it would stand in contrast to the word snack. So it's defining snack. That would make it a little bit easier. But if a person starts speaking in the language in the next line of dialogue, then I would not put it in all in italics. I wouldn't anyway.
Right. And again, it's going to be a choice. It's what you want the character to do and what you want the reader to understand that the character is doing. So it's kind of your call. So good question. Thank you for that. And I notice now her mic is muted and her video is muted. So maybe she stepped away from the computer. But Molly has snuck on. So when she pops back on, there she is.
I have to admit, I had computer issues, and so I kind of blocked so you guys wouldn't see me eating my ice cream sandwich. So,
whoa! Ice cream sandwich.
Molly,
it was a really good dinner, and I had to finish it up. I'm sorry. Hi, room.
Did you bring enough to share with the whole class?
Yes.
I did have a student at one point. Short story, who used to walk in every Friday late to class, like 10 or 15 minutes late to first period, with a breakfast burrito, a big, massive breakfast burrito.
Nice.
This happened 2 or 3 weeks in a row, and I said, that's not okay. You cannot show up late to this class anymore unless there's a breakfast burrito for me, too. And to her credit, every week after that, she showed up 10 or 15 minutes late with a big old breakfast burrito. It's like clockwork.
That is too funny.
You should ask for a $20 bill.
I'm the worst teacher ever. Yeah, it was fun. It was good breakfast burritos too. So
nice.
But before we move on, because writers are all about detail, what kind of ice cream sandwich?
Chocolate chip cookie dough surrounded with vanilla, or vanilla ice cream surrounded with chocolate chip cookies. It's really good, and I was really needing ice cream because it was 107 degrees, and I was working from my car most of the day today. So it was actually 115 degrees where I was at.
Yeah, you're still a sinner.
It is so good right now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Let's move on, Erin. She's going to rub this in our face here.
It was a hot day. I'll give her that. It was miserable hot. So
because I had to call Erin at about 11 o'clock to talk about podcast stuff, and it was like 103 then at 11 in the morning. And for those of you who don't live in the Southern California desert, it only gets hotter from there.
Before we went out to our trip, Ireland, England, and Wales, my tour director contacted me and said, just so you know, we're having a heat wave. I said, what's your heat wave? She says, we've had 6 days where it's got up to 90. I giggled. Yeah, it was rude, but I definitely giggled. All right. Question number 2, moving on here. What do you do when you have too many ideas distracting you from your current work in progress? This seems like a very familiar, very common problem. Pops, how do you handle that?
I don't know. I've been out of ideas for a long time now. So now what you do is you just simply jot the idea down, but get back to your work in progress. There's a 10,000 things that will try to distract you from the work. There always has been. There always will be. And it's a very difficult thing to have that kind of focus. But and more in my life, I'm trying to practice this one thing. I talked about it at Blue Ridge when I did the keynote, focusing on this one thing principle, that as you do the one thing, you keep track of other things, but you do the one thing, then you move on to the next. And I always think of Dean Koontz with this when he was working on a book, and the idea for Odd Thomas occurred to him. He just sort of heard a voice in his imagination that said, my name is Odd Thomas, and I see dead people, no, not like the movie. And that's all he had. But he thought it had some merit, so he got a legal pad. He wrote down as many things as came to mind, and then he put the legal pad away and went back to his book and finished it. Then he came back to Odd Thomas. So that's what you do, is you just keep a few notes. I always keep a pad of paper next to me so I can jot down things in the spur of the moment, and then add them to a list later. And this is not unusual. I used to keep a list of roughly 20 to 25 ideas in a Excel spreadsheet. I was always adding them and taking some out. Most of them will never see the light of day, but it didn't matter. It kind of prompts more ideas. So that's my answer to it is you just jot it down and then move on.
Mm-hmm.
And occasionally those ideas will worm their way into your current work in progress. I'm the same way. I've operated that way. I probably picked it up from you, Pops, one thing at a time. I've consistently used projects that I'm excited to write as a type of a carrot on the string. And so what I will do, kind of as you talked about on Thomas, is I'll write, a quick character description, quick plot summary. I'll go as far as to write an entire scene. If it's just very vivid, very clear in my mind, I might do an opening scene. I've been known to actually do proposals for entire books while I'm working on a different project. But for the most part, that's stuff that's been more recent. I've found myself juggling more often, and so I guess really what it is the exception to my rule is co-writing. And so I always have one solo project that I'm working on, but if I'm co-writing something, I'll do those in tandem. Does it get distracting and confusing? At times, but I find that I'm able, for the most part, to do it. And so as long as the projects are not too similar, and I enjoy it, something about it keeps me fresh. But the real thing is this: you have to finish. You have to get to the end. If these ideas are distracting you, and maybe you need to put them away. If the muse is just really hammering you hard and that's all you can think about is this one project, maybe you need to put the other on ice for a bit and finish this one that's nagging at you. Either way, finish. The real risk here comes in when you do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things and none of them get done. That's the problem. And Pops, I'm speaking for you here. Correct me if I'm wrong. You see a lot of new writers doing exactly that. They'll do 50 pages of a book. They'll get bored with it. They'll start 50 pages of another book, get bored with it, start another book. Or they'll rewrite the same book 900, 400 million times, whatever it is. I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at my camera. Your face just happens to be near the camera. Whatever the case may be.
I only rewrote it 398 times.
Okay. Whatever the case may be, that's the real risk. And so if you're able to juggle multiple projects, and on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you do project A, and Tuesday, Thursday, you do project B, if you work that way and you finish them both, I mean, I don't want to stand in your way. I just think from experience, what Pops and I have seen is that rarely works. Rarely. Pops, I've put words in your mouth. Go ahead and refute them if you need to.
No, there have been times where I've had to work on 2 things, but what I usually do is divide the day up. Mm-hmm. And the key for me was the project that I'm under contract for or have a deadline, I have to do a certain amount of work. I have to get a certain number of words done. I have to get a certain number of pages done. If I don't, I fall behind. And then that's where the stress comes, and it no longer is a joy to write. Well, it's always hard to write, but it's no longer the adventure of writing. It's it's pressure, and so we lose some of the joy that's in it. But if you have to do more than one project, then set aside some of your time. But now, really, the only way you can do that is if you're a full-time writer. So I could write for, say, 4 hours in the morning, and maybe even another 2 hours in the afternoon on a project, and then set aside an hour and a half to do something else for a little bit, to sort of clean out the cobwebs, or something shorter. Again, Isaac Asimov, we've talked about having 3 projects going at one time, and he would just work on one, though, until he got stuck. Mm-hmm. And then he would turn and work on the other one, and hopefully that would free him up. But he's doing one thing at a time. Even when he has 3 projects going, he's focused on a primary one, and then if he gets stuck, he's not going to waste his time staring out the window. He's going to move on to the next one.
Right. Yeah. Well said. So, however the muse works with you, as long as you finish, whatever it takes to finish that project. So dividing up the day is a great idea. So, experiment. And if you're a new writer and you're, distracted with lots of different project ideas, and you haven't finished anything, I say you owe it to yourself to focus and finish. There's another question later on about how many unpublished books and projects do we have, and my first novel is not published, and it never will be. It's terrible. It's a dead book. But I had to finish it. I had to learn how to write the end and actually get there. I'd never written anything that was, 300 plus pages. I had no idea how to do it. And so for me, that novel's purpose was learning. It was learning on the job, so to speak. And once I accomplished that, I just put it away and moved on to the next one. And haven't really looked back. And so that can be a very powerful lesson, is getting to the end. And sometimes that means putting some steps up.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, because really this is a function of fear. And I always define fear as FEAR, a false expectation about reality. And what we fear is we're going to spend all our time working on this and it might not go anywhere. And that is certainly true. That happens to all of us. But we fear that maybe if I don't work on this other one, that might be the one that does go someplace. But then while you're working on that, another idea comes to you, because that's what creative people do. But creative people not only have many ideas, they know how to manage their ideas and then produce. And that's usually where the problem is. We're afraid we're going to miss out. And there's some abbreviation for that, fear of missing.
FOMO.
FOMO, fear of missing out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that FOMO that if I don't switch over to this, then I may be wasting my time. Well, yeah, you might, but you're not going to know. You switch over to the other one, you might be wasting your time. You don't know, because we can't predict the future.
Right.
I am. My 2 cents, I have taken to keeping sticky notes with me wherever I go. So I can write a quick little note, just an idea, and just one idea at a time as it comes to me. That way, when I come home or wherever I am, I can pile that on top of the other sticky notes that go with that particular idea or project. If it's something I'm currently working on, then it's what I'm working on, and I'll discard it after I incorporate it. Or scrap paper. I've actually done the actual writer thing and sat in a restaurant and written notes on napkins and taken them home to transcribe them. And I have notes. I kept a notebook of TV quotes or ideas or something that would jostle my creative muse. And when I started writing NOLA, I went through that and I realized that there was a lot of good material there that I wrote, I don't know, years ago, just one line here or a couple of paragraphs there. And I was able to incorporate it into the characters that I've been working on. And that's pretty fun. But then it's also satisfying to peel off those sticky notes and say, okay, this has been used, so now I can get rid of it and throw it away, and see a pile of sticky notes on the floor all crumpled up at the end of the night to say, hey, that's what I did. But I also take Sunday afternoons or any particular afternoon to work on my monthly articles that I blog for other people, if I'm doing any particular blogging for other people that month.
That's good.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Because we're creatives, we should not ignore ideas. We should acknowledge them, spend a few minutes with them. But if we're going to be professional creatives, then we're going to have to finish something. So, stockpiling, maybe that'd be a good phrase for it. Stockpiling ideas. And time will tell you whether or not they're good ideas. I've had some wonderful ideas that once seen in the light of day, I thought that maybe I should get help or something, because it was just not a good idea at all. But at the time it did, and sometimes even for days or weeks, and then I come back to it and go, man, I'm glad I didn't pour any more time into that.
Or you'll tweak it. You'll write it down. You look at it in the light of day, and now it's ugly. It's the ugly baby, that looked fine when the lights are out, but now the baby is right there and ugly. And your friend is saying, what do you think of my beautiful baby? And you're thinking, it is
not a beautiful baby.
It's a baby.
It's like Winston Churchill.
Yeah, it's a baby. Pretty baby. Okay, anyhow. You tweak it. You work with it a little bit. You massage it. You do what you need to do for it to move from one shape into a workable shape. I've had several ideas that have come to me in the dark of night, in that wonderful twilight sleep where I'm not really asleep, but I'm not exactly awake. And all the inputs are getting jumbled, and I'm starting to dream. And I've had some interesting ideas there, and then they sound stupid when I say them out loud. And so you work with them, and some of them you can keep, and some of them you can't. But yeah, don't ignore the idea. So,
one of Al's axioms is that ideas are like stew; they needs to simmer. So just because a good idea comes to you doesn't mean it's ready yet. You may have to let it stew a little bit, and then more stuff will come to you. So I guess the bottom line is note it, jot it down, let it percolate, but move on with what you're doing.
Another thing that we might want to mention here, or just as we move along, is that we've got a good active chat room. Throw some questions out there. We should have some time at the end still. We'll try and move through this so that we can have some time at the end. So if you've got any pressing questions from the chat room, throw them in there. We'll try and get to them. About anything goes. So it can be about writing, but it can also be about the life of a writer, or it can be about us personally, like in our personal writing habits, not necessarily about our personal lives. That might be more than you want to know. But anything about our works, questions about, for Pops, and when you were writing A Ship Possessed in chapter 14, why did you do things this way? So don't be afraid if you've got those questions. Go ahead and let us know. Drop those in the chat room. Molly will keep track of them, and we'll go from there. So third question, moving on. What was the first book that made you cry? And what was the first book that made you laugh out loud?
Reading my first novel made me cry.
In a good way or a bad way?
Little joke. I've got books out that sometimes I cry about, but and not necessarily because they're sad in that sense. It's difficult for me to say. I do remember reading a compilation of short stories by Spider Robinson, the Callahan Bar series, and Aaron always likes to give little disclaimers. So it's got a lot of language, and so it's kind of crude at times, but it's also just very well handled, and at times could be very moving. The basic core of the story is Jake, who goes to this very unusual bar that he stumbles across, and that's the thing about Callahan's Bar. If you have a need, sooner or later you'll end up in Callahan's Bar. But aliens show up, and time travelers and stuff like that. Just it's sort of a universal place with that, but it's got a lot of humor in it. And I remember vividly, I was laying on the couch reading Spider Robinson's short story in that thing, and I think I rolled off the couch. It was one of the funniest things I had ever read. And by the same token, Dean Koontz, who isn't known for being a comedy writer, but he has written some very humorous stuff. And for the life of me now, I can't think of the name of the book. I meant to get the title of it. But it was one of the funniest Dean Koontz books I ever read. And I had the great misfortune of being alone. My wife, I think, was up in Fresno before we lived up here. And so I was alone, and I went to this Italian restaurant for my dinner, and I took the book with me and had the worst time not laughing out loud in the restaurant by myself. I didn't want to get carted off, but I remember it was that funny that I had trouble not snickering aloud. So that one, I think one of the ones that really sort of brought me to tears that comes to mind, Dean Koontz has one again, but there have been others. And oddly enough, a nonfiction book called Day One, which has to do with the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But it did a ground zero point of view. Instead of us seeing an American plane fly over and drop the bomb, it's from the ground view of the Japanese on the ground. Now, it doesn't get into whether it should have been done or not. That's not the point. He was just a very good writer. And he portrayed, I don't want to get into too much details, but the children running through the streets with their clothes burned off and stuff like that. And by the time I got to the end of that chapter, I was done. I had been beaten up, kicked to the curb, wrung out like a wash rag at the end, because he had made it all so very real. Second War notwithstanding, and some of the atrocities the Japanese had inflicted, such as Pearl Harbor and other places, and prisoner of war camps and the like. It's just the horror of war in it, but that made me at least think about the innocents who get caught up in war. And so that one broke me down pretty good.
There's a great podcast, Pops, that you should listen to on Radiolab called Double Blasted. That is exactly, it talks about that. It talks about a man who worked in Hiroshima, and bomb went off and he got blasted there, worked for days and days and days to get over to Nagasaki just in time for the second bomb fall on him. But it talks
there are two
about,
of them.
Yeah, there are several actually. There are numerous ones, but there are only a few that actually survived. But
in day one, he talks about the two who were in the bottom of the ship. They were shipbuilders.
He was not a shipbuilder, this guy.
They were in the bottom of the ship when the first bomb went off, and so they were protected. And so they had, of course, they weren't going to be finishing any work there, so they went on to do some more work in Nagasaki. So talk about people with bad luck. They're probably one of the few people, a handful of people that have been hit with 2 atomic bombs and lived to talk about it.
Yeah, this you'd like it, Pops. It talks about all the science of it and the biology and what it did to him and all that kind of stuff is great. So, all right, moving on. Oh, it's my turn.
We're all bummed out.
Yeah. There you go. Works that made me cry. I don't often cry.
You cry every day. Oh, you mean for
different reasons? Yeah. For me, I'd be hard pressed to name a novel that made me cry. There are portions of novels that have made me cry. Tim O'Brien's "If I Die." No. The other one. Excuse me. The Things They Carried. There's a great story in there called "How to Tell a True War Story," and there's a portion in it that is very, very hard to read. But I think the two that made the most powerful impact on me were short stories. In the Cemetery Where Al Jolson is Buried by Amy Hempel, and Popular Mechanics by Raymond Carver. Phenomenal. Just absolute gut punches. They twist up your insides. But it's dramatic and powerful how they're able to accomplish that in so few pages. In terms of books that make me laugh out loud, the one that came to my mind, I don't know if this is the one that first made me laugh out loud, but it's definitely the one that I remember reading first that made me laugh out loud. I remember, I think, Crystal or Shondell reading it, one of my sisters read it first. Perhaps you may have read it before then, but just everyone who read it in our house would just go through the house just laughing like madmen, just bent over, doubled, crying. And I'm like, what is happening? And it's this book. And I'm like, no book can be that funny. I was wrong about that. See if you can find a copy on Amazon, and don't read it in public because they will carry you away. But it is, phenomenal. Content warning a little bit. It's about him and his wife and their relationship and stuff like that. And so there are some chapters that are detailed, but it's so ridiculously hilarious. Some of the observations that he makes and how he spins them. So that book was phenomenal. Tina Fey's
Couplehood
by Paul Reiser. He also has one called Fatherhood or Parenthood. Also very, very funny, but I thought
the actor.
Mad About You. It was hard not to imagine Helen Hunt as his wife, though he's not married to Helen Hunt, but in my mind he is, because of that show. Fatherhood, Couplehood, and another one, Tina Fey's Bossy Pants, had me laughing pretty good. That was pretty good too. So,
Which, by the way, is quality writing. If you can write something funny that people reading it by themselves will bust out laughing, well, that's talent. That's hard to do. I try to put humor in most of my books, but I don't know if I ever get that kind of response.
I'm lucky if I get a line or two into my books. Yeah. So comedy's really tough to do. Very, very difficult. So, all right, moving on. 6:05. I want to make sure we do have some questions from the chat room. So, does writing energize you or exhaust you? Pops, what do you think?
Short answer, it brings me satisfaction, but it kicks me to the curb. There's no sense in lying about it. We like to portray, writers as having this idealistic life where you sit around and you got an Irish setter at your feet and you own a cup of tea or coffee or something, and you're just happily writing away and the words are flowing. It's a good bit harder than that. And at times, especially depending on what you're writing, there have been several scenes I've written where I've quit for the day. The time I got to the end of the scene, I couldn't write anymore. It was just too grueling, because I can't tell the difference between reality and fiction. Most people can't. When you give it a thought, you go, okay, well, I'm reading a book or I'm writing a book. But when you're doing it, you're immersed in it. So while it brings me satisfaction, it often kicks me to the curb.
I love the movie with Will Ferrell about the writer, the metafiction piece, Stranger Than Fiction. There's a scene, and it resonates. As a writer, I think you owe it to yourself to watch that film. Very, very good. And there's a scene that I think really resonates. What you're talking about, Pops, about the grueling work of it. And she has like a near mental breakdown in it, and understandably so. It's very well done. I did not expect to see a Will Ferrell movie and come out like getting close to tears. Like, it's just not something that you anticipate, but well done. For me, it does both. I'm energized when I start my day, and writing when the words are flowing, I'm very energized. But if I have any energy at the end of the scene, it means I'm not done writing. So for me, it's both. More energy at the front, more exhausting at the end. And it's a different kind of exhaustion. I'll finish writing and then I'll go do something else. I'll do my workout when I'm done, writing, whatever the case may be. I'm not like necessarily physically tired, but it just kind of, it's emotionally draining, like you say, Pops. It can be, you're on a bit of a roller coaster there, depending on what you're writing. So for me, my rule is if I've got anything left in the tank, I try and keep writing. Some days that's longer than others. Usually it's about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Maybe on a good day, I might, sneak in 3 or 4 if I don't have anything else going on. Those are the really good days where, oh man, if I can get 4 hours of writing, whoa, like I'm just on cloud 9 the rest of the night. Good stuff. So, Pops, what is your writing kryptonite?
Well, when I first read that, I wasn't sure what the question was about, what was being asked. But if you mean what keeps me from writing, that being my kryptonite, then it's distraction. And the score upon score of distractions. And unfortunately, I distract is that a squirrel?
Yeah.
No, hey, here, focus.
Oh,
Focus.
yeah.
Wait,
for me, it's distraction because I have too many interests.
Where was the squirrel? Where's the squirrel? Oh, wait, hold on. I got YouTube open. Let me check. Oh, somebody uploaded something on YouTube. And I got to play a game of Magic the Gathering. Shiny.
That's why some writers write on typewriters, because you can't get on the internet with them.
Yeah. I've had to do that.
You can't do any Facebook. You can't do, that's it. That's all you're going to do put a piece of paper in the typewriter and pound away and then put in another piece of paper. That's probably been one of the most detrimental things to writers has been the internet. It's also one of the best things that ever happened to writers is the internet. So
it's a blessing.
Yeah, the whole discipline thing gets to me. Discipline thing gets to me. So
indeed. Indeed. All right, Pops. I loved this question. Do you try to be more original or to deliver what readers want?
I hadn't put this in the notes. It just popped into my mind. I was talking to an agent I used to have before we came to a parting of the ways, but we were talking and she said, you know what you need to do? You need to write another Dan Brown book. I said, you mean like the Da Vinci Code? She goes, yeah, that's what you need to do. He didn't know he was doing it. It is quite honestly one of the dumbest things I've heard. And being derivative is not a good way to go for a writer. I remember when Jurassic Park came out, you could go into the bookstore. You remember bookstores, don't you? They actually had buildings you'd walk into.
We still have one in town.
Yeah, we have one then we have some used bookstores and other stuff like that. But yeah, they're very few now. There's still some Barnes and Nobles around, but there used to be Walden's and all the others. But I remember walking into, I think it was a Walden's, and there was there'd been Jurassic Park, and then I think there's a half dozen other dinosaur books about dinosaurs, including some written by paleontologists who were trying their hand at fiction. Yeah, so I want to deliver what the reader wants if it's in the genre I write. If they like supernatural suspense or mystery, then yeah, I don't mind writing to what readers want, but I don't start off the book that way. I start with the idea, and I always keep the reader in mind, but I always strive to be original. So if I want to write something that has narrow appeal, that's not going to appeal to many readers, then I self-publish it. So, for example, I wrote a short book on William Jennings Bryan's undelivered speech at the Scopes trial. Now, let's get honest here. There's probably 25 people in the country that want to read something like that. So I knew I wouldn't make any money on it, and I knew no publisher was going to publish it. You just have to have a deep and abiding interest in the man and in the situation. But nonetheless, I wrote it and I went ahead and published it because I wanted to, and I could. But for getting contracts and stuff like that, I try to keep track what's going on in the market and if my stuff will fit it. But I usually don't say, oh, ours is, another writer told me one time, said, what you need to do is you need to write romance. I said, you don't know me very well. If I try to write romance, I'd probably end up with a comedy book like we were talking about earlier. So no, I've never been very good about being derivative and you're just writing straight for the money kind of thing.
Right. The way the question is asked is as if the two are mutually exclusive. You have to be derivative and deliver what the readers want, or you can be original. And for me, I think it's possible to do both. And I really think in a lot of ways, this is going to sound awful, I don't think readers always know what they want. They know that they want a fantasy book. They know they want a young adult fantasy book. Okay. They know they want a sci-fi. Okay. They know that if they prefer hard sci-fi or soft sci-fi, that's all fine. And they'll pick up a book based on, the back cover copy, based on the cover, all that kind of stuff. But it's our job as writers to deliver a story that may feel somewhat familiar in ways because we're pulling from, archetypes, but it should never feel cliche or derivative. It should always feel fresh and original. I think what readers want is to be surprised. I think not necessarily a twist ending Sixth Sense style, but they want to see something take a different turn. If they want to read The Lord of the Rings, they're not going to buy your book that's not The Lord of the Rings or that looks like it. They're going to read The Lord of the Rings. But if they want fantasy or high fantasy in this particular case, or epic high fantasy or whatever the case may be, they like that genre. They want elves, they want dwarves, they want sword fights, they want castles, they want horses, whatever. But the way things change is, can be dramatic. The Game of Thrones, no one saw that coming. George R.R. Martin broke every rule that there is in fiction. He thumbed his nose at all the traditional rules of fiction, and it's a wild success. And now everybody wants to do fantasy the George R.R. Martin way. Well, again, if you want to read George R.R. Martin, that's who you're going to read. You're not going to read some knockoff. So I think it's our job. I liken it to this story that I heard somewhere. I may have lived it. I'm not sure. But if you buy your child a bike for Christmas and your child does not want a bike, you're going to spend the 2-3 weeks leading up to Christmas convincing your child that he wants a bike. And that way on Christmas, when you wheel it out from the garage, they're surprised and they're satisfied, right? They didn't know they wanted a bike, but now you've told them how much they want a bike. And when they get a bike, they go, that's amazing. I didn't think I was getting a bike.
My sarcasm alarm is going off. I think you bent the needle, bud.
You've orchestrated that as an author. Don't tell my kids I did that, by the way. You orchestrate that as an author by the way you weave the story and tell the story. Your story should dictate what the reader wants. Does that make sense?
It does.
All right.
Sometimes readers don't know what they want.
Yep.
Yeah.
They may want, again, a particular genre, but they don't know what they want in that genre. A lot of readers are tired of reading Lord of the Ring knockoffs, and so they want something that's still fantasy that feels familiar, but they don't want another generic Sauron and the rings and the hobbits and that kind of stuff. They've seen it before. So, yeah. All right. Moving on.
All righty. Or do you want to start taking stuff from the room, or?
I've been collecting them.
Oh, okay.
So as we go, I am going to skip the next one so that we have time for questions from the chat room. Does that seem fair?
Fine by me.
I'll keep it in the show notes, though. This one is really fast. What was the best money you've ever spent on writing?
Buying William Zinsser's book on writing well.
For me, it was my MFA. Money well spending, because I'm still paying for it and probably will be for the next 12 years.
Although
years.
I think I was going to do another book kind of like William Zinsser's. I was going to call it On Writing Gooder.
You should. I like that.
That would be surprising. That's really what readers want.
Yeah, that's almost a good idea.
Yeah.
Almost.
Almost. Pops, what animal best describes you as a writer?
No animal has ever described me, so they can't talk.
That's their loss.
So I don't understand the question. If I had to choose an animal, I'd probably say a hummingbird. Because I flit from one thing to another thing.
And you're always beating your wings.
Yeah, I keep thinking, settle down here.
Tiny little hearts. There's a great Joyous Vulgaris. There's a great essay. You want to talk about something that might make you weep. It's an essay called Joyous Vulgaris. I don't remember who it's by off the top of my head, but it's a great essay. Everybody should Google it, and then have a box of tissues with you. So it's only like a page or two, and it talks about the hummingbird and the hummingbird's heart. So moving on. I have had an animal describe me. I had a parrot that said, "Dummy, dummy."
You know how long it took me to train that parrot?
Oh, good times. I thought something was fishy. All right, moving on. A fishy dolphin. I guess a fishy parrot. Dolphin was the animal I was going to say. Moving on. They're tenacious, playful. They're intelligent. Sure.
They're a football team.
They're a football team, so there's that too. How many unpublished and unfinished books do you have, Pops?
I think most writers have at least one. I have one. It's a shame because I thought it was really good, but it was going to be, I was helping someone else write it, and it went nowhere. And then I have a proposal that had 9 publishers show great interest in it, and they all passed on it. So,
been there.
Yeah.
Oh, been there. Yeah.
The whole goal of publishing is to build up your self-esteem and your excitement, and then dash it on the rocks.
Right.
Not really. It's good. It's a good business.
It is. It can be. It's not always roses, but I have several. My first novel, which will never see the light of the day, that's dead. And I started another one that's unfinished and will never be published because, again, also a dead book, dead end. I'd have to really start that over. It's just not good. A handful of proposals. Then I've got I've finished the Hand of Adonai series. So there's theoretically 2 books coming out this year, and possibly 1 to 2 more coming out after that at some point. I don't have contracts for those yet, so we'll have to see what that looks like. But they're done, and I plan to publish them eventually. It's just a matter of timing. So, Pops, this is an interesting question. What's one scene that you left on the editing room floor that you wished you could have kept in your novel?
Well, I cheated, and I think it was in the book Terminal Justice. I had to cut a lot of scenes out of it because the publisher really wanted it, but they just didn't want it as long as I had written it. Let me rephrase that. When I say as long as I had written it, meaning the book's length. They didn't like the book's length, not the fact that I had written it. Boy, that went south quick.
That's what it sounded like.
I know, that went south quick.
Good recovery. Good recovery.
Words are my life. But so I had to cut out 1 out of every 3 pages. I had to reduce the book by 1/3, which was something I never want to do again. That was just absolutely horrible. I made a hash of it first time, then had to do it again. But there was a scene in there I liked that had to do with a ship near the coast of Africa, the eastern coast of Africa, near Somalia. and I had to cut the scene. It had to do with pirates taking over ships, which still goes on. But what I did is when I cut a scene, I just keep it on the computer somewhere, and then I had another book, and I snuck it in there. Yeah, I had to rewrite the whole thing, but it doesn't matter. The basics were there, so the whole scene was pretty much outlined. But I put it in that instead. So sometimes you could reuse them.
Nice. I tend to do intensive trimming rather than chopping entire scenes or chapters, with few exceptions. I'll do a lot of cutting before I finish a novel. Like while I'm still doing the first draft, I'll do a ton of cutting. But that's still me trying to find my way, so I don't really count that. Once I've got the solid working draft, it's really just trimming. After that, cutting 1 out of every 3 words if I can.
You take out all the conjunctions and stuff like that?
Yeah.
The verbs, get rid of all the verbs.
Yeah, no nouns or verbs. They just get in the way. So
preposition after preposition.
Yeah. I think the one that I cut the most was Heart Song. And I think we ended up definitely north of 100,000 words on that. I think we're actually about 140, and I cut it down to about 70 to 75,000. That took a lot. So there was a lot of trimming. I did take out entire scenes. Really, in the first few letters is what had to go. They just weren't strong enough. It took a while to get the ball rolling, so we kind of leaned back on Kurt Vonnegut's rule about starting as close to the end as possible. So we chopped out their initial correspondences and the announcement that Mark was sick and kind of the rekindling of this old friendship that they had to begin with. That was good for us to write, to get to know our characters, but it didn't really benefit the readers much, and so it had to go. But they were nice. There was some good writing in there, and I was kind of sad to see those go. But there's that. All right, moving on quickly. I think I got all the questions from the chat room. I found 2. Dave wanted to know. He says, "Aaron, you told me that you rewrote a couple of your books, like Last Laugh, which is one of my projects that I'm going to be working on when I finish my current one, because the story was going the wrong direction. How do you do that? Do you end up throwing out entire chapters? Must be like tearing your guts out." Yes, it is, and yes, it is. It's actually I don't weep too much over it because I know it's going in a better place. Man, the one that I'm working on now has been brutal, but I must have rewrote. It's probably the book I've struggled with the most writing, the one in my current work in progress, and I finally found the key to unlock the plot and the novel, and it has been dramatic what I've been able to do. And so I'm probably throwing away realistically 65 to 70,000 words, almost an entire novel. But I'm repurposing much of it, and a lot of it was mandatory and necessary for me to really get to know my characters and to be able to build a backstory that you'll see threads of throughout the novel without having to read all of it up front. And so I think the novel's better off for it, but it's the frustrating part is knowing that I've written almost an entire novel and it's not going to be usable. I don't count that as wasted time, though. It was, again, necessary for me to get to where I currently am. So, Pops, have you ever done something like that? Major overhauls?
Yeah, well, the book I was just talking about, that was very difficult. And then one of the other books, in fact, I think it was the same book, I was asked to write the screenplay for. Didn't go anyplace, but you think it's tough to trim your book down, try to get it down to 120 screenplay pages, not real book pages, but screenplay. It was just almost impossible. You start combining characters and cutting out supporting subplots and stuff like that. So it's very, very difficult to do. It's much easier just to start all over and write a movie than it is to do an adaptation. So I always admire those who are able to do that. So yeah, at times I've had to trim things down. And I think it's very important for writers to understand. I've been trying to teach my students this. In writing, you have at least 2 phases. Phase 1 is the rough draft, and it's called a rough draft because it's rough. No one's going to read it. It's not meant for eyes. Okay, it's meant for you to, and forgive the illustration, but this is what it's sometimes called: vomiting on the page. You're getting this stuff out, which is kind of what you're describing, Aaron. That you're writing, you're getting to know your character, so you just keep writing. Then you go back and say, now I got to tell the story. And someplace in all of this is the story, and so you start doing the trimming and the like. And the second phase, of course, is the rewrite, which might have several drafts, but that second stage is the rewrite. So normally I've not had to do that, but there have been times when I've just ripped stuff out.
Yeah, it's tough, but it's sometimes it's very freeing. I don't know if you've ever felt like this, Pops, but there are times where I think it's almost, this is going to sound terrible, it's almost like getting rid of a cancer, going in for an intensive surgery. And I don't mean to make light of this, by the way. I'm just trying to make an analogy, a metaphor here. I'm not sure it's working, but where you've just got this bloated mass that's just kind of killing the rest of the novel. And sometimes it's a relief to cut that out. And so a lot of these scenes that are just not going the right direction, sometimes that's how I see it. Like I'm a surgeon here, and I'm having to cut these masses so that I can allow the rest of the story to live. I just called my writing cancer. This is a weird podcast.
Yeah.
Things are going.
I've had to do the reverse. I had an editor wanted me add something to the front end of the book, wanted really a prologue, and I didn't want to do it. But I went ahead and did it, and I wrote it, and it was okay. But I've regretted it ever since. It just wasn't right. The pacing wasn't right. It gave away too much. And it's one of those things, and this sometimes happens when you deal with editors, because they're people. They're trying to be helpful, but they've read over it and they say, okay, this is what it needs. When you've labored over it, not read over it, but you've labored over it, and no, this will throw the whole balance off. And so to this day, I regret it, having done it, but there it is. Mm-hmm. So I've had the reverse of that.
Right. Well, last question here from Becky. She says, when you read something another author has written and you want to use something similar, how do you go about making it your own? What do you think, Pops?
I don't.
You don't?
No. If I see that an author's done something very clever, I'll study it. But I never try to replicate it with, just different words. It's just not something I'm comfortable doing.
Yeah,
now, there's going to be some overlap on that. It's just because, how many times has Romeo and Juliet been done? All right, so we normally think of Shakespeare, but West Side Story is Romeo and Juliet. Mm-hmm. So there's really a whole bunch of those things. So you can take the basic concept and write your own story around it. Mm-hmm. But I do let other writers teach me. When I read, if I see how they handled something, I'll take note of what they did and then try to utilize that. But I don't take anything that resembles the scene that they did or the character or anything like that. It has to be mine, all mine. Otherwise, I feel like I'm cheating.
Yeah, I agree. I think the best option is to try and combine ideas. You mentioned West Side Story. It's Romeo and Juliet with gangs.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be confused with Twilight, which is Romeo and Juliet with fangs.
You've been waiting for that one, haven't you?
I just realized it rhymed, and that makes everything beautiful. So anyhow, yeah, inspiration is great, but imitation, maybe imitating a style, like you say, study it, Pops. I agree with that. But if you're talking about taking plot elements, I think that's where you're starting to kind of get into some more dangerous territory. I've looked at some figurative language that's been used, and I've studied that in depth. And so that's what I would recommend is the study of it, but not necessarily trying to mimic it.
Or some of the little techniques they use. I'm thinking now Clive Cussler again, who always has a prologue that takes place outside the timeline of the story. So it's something in the past, some historical thing, and you read it, and it's interesting, and then you start going through the main body of the book wondering why in the world that thing was there, and then you find out in the end. Okay,
right.
So that's kind of a technique. You can do that, I would think, with that much. It's just technique of writing, structure. Sometimes you can adopt structure if you want to be like Patterson and have paragraph or chapters that only go 1.5 pages or something like that. That's cinematic style. Okay, I don't see that as cheating. You're looking at just another option in structure with that. But if there's just something like a poignant moment or a bit of action or something like that, I don't think I could lift it, disguise it, and then put it in my book.
Right. Agreed.
So that's probably not what's being asked, but
right. I think the inspiration is really where you want to be. Maybe combine ideas, and that might kind of help you take another step away from just mimicry, if you will. So, yeah, I think that's about it. Molly, did I miss any questions?
No, I believe you got them both. That was the only questions in the chat room.
Nice. All right,
man.
Well, next week we get back to gross anatomy. I'm sorry, in 2 weeks we get back to gross anatomy of a novel, plot and pacing. So we should be back on a regular topic schedule there, and then we've got some fun stuff in store for you in a few more weeks. So look forward to that. We are over time, so thanks guys for coming out. Thank you for listening. And if you're looking for us, you can find Pops at altongansky.com. You can find Molly at franklyMyDearMojo.com, and you can find me at aarongansky.com. So until next week, thanks for listening and good writing.